Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. It was a Friday evening on a beautiful summer day. My beer was icy cold when it slid down my throat. The Cubs beat the Cardinals on the big screen 7-2 in the fifth inning. My faithful German shepherd, Rice, lay curled up next to me and mostly slept, waking up and opening her eyes only when I let out a joyful exclamation about the success of the Cubs. Except for the TV and my occasional cheers, the house was quiet. My wife Tracy was visiting a neighbor, and my 18-year-old son and 17-year-old daughter both spent the night visiting friends. It was just me and the dog, the cubicles, and a box of Corona in the refrigerator. Oh, yes, and limes. I didn't mess with limes very often, but I bought a couple in the afternoon when I found out I was going to be alone in the evening. I feel good. I heard the front door open and close, and assumed it was my wife returning from a visit to her longtime friend Lisa. I could hear her moving in the front of the house, but I didn't hear her call out to me in greeting, as she usually did. It seemed a little strange to me, but just at that moment, Cubs manager David Ross brought out his starting pitcher in the fourth inning when the Cubs had a big advantage, causing me to explode with anger and wake up the dog once again. It must have been at least 5 minutes before Tracy finally made it to the living room. She looked thoughtful and maybe nervous. She did not come to my chair and did not bend over for a kiss, as usual, but instead sat on the edge of the sofa to the left of my chair. I watched her with one eye while I watched the game with the other. "Can we talk for a minute, Bob?" she asked in a voice I could barely hear over the noise of the TV. By this point, she had my full attention. "Of course," I replied. I noticed that beads of sweat stood out on her forehead, and she seemed to be breathing raggedly. I wondered if any of our friends had fallen ill or died. "Can you turn off the TV, Bob?" she asked, clenching and unclenching her fists. Turning off the TV in the middle of a Cubs game? She knew what she was asking. It had to be something serious, death, not illness. I had an unpleasant feeling in my lower abdomen. I grabbed the remote and turned off the sound. "What's wrong, baby? You don't look well. Did someone die?" "God, no. No one died," she replied quickly. "It's just that it's very important to me, and I need to make sure you're listening to me completely." I nodded without saying anything. A plug of bad thoughts formed in my brain. We sat staring at each other for at least half a minute. There was fear in her eyes and something else. Anger, perhaps. "You know that I love you without a trace, and I would never cheat on you. I would never date another man behind your back, would I?" It wasn't exactly the question I was expecting. Suddenly, the dinner I ate earlier in the evening and the 2 glasses of beer I drank while playing seemed to want to come back, right here on the living room floor. I nodded again, silently. "I'm 45 years old, Bob. I've only slept with one man in my entire life besides you," she began. "I'm still an attractive woman. My friends even say that I'm a hot mom. I want to sleep with another man, just once, to feel the thrill of meeting a new man. Another man. One more time, before you and I grow old together." What the hell is this? I sat motionless. I do not know how long. It sounded like a speeding train was passing right by my ears. "No, no, absolutely not," I shouted back, jumping up from my chair. "It won't happen while I'm breathing." She stared at me with wide eyes as I paced back and forth. It must have been a bad dream. I must have fallen asleep in my chair and found myself in the middle of a nightmare. "This has nothing to do with you and me, Bob. It's all about me, my needs as a woman, above all that concerns you and our family," she said, and her voice seemed to grow stronger and more confident as she spoke. "I think I've been a pretty good wife and mother all these years. I always put family first. This time I need to do something for myself. I need to do this to feel like a beautiful woman in control of her life. Don't you feel like a beautiful woman with me?" I asked, realizing that I sounded like a whiny loser. "I tell you that I love you all the time. I think I'm constantly showing you that you're a beautiful woman. I still lust after you, and I'm pretty sure I'm not hiding it too much. You're doing it, and I like it, but it's coming about something else. My ego still needs to be confirmed. Other men besides you, Bob. It's nice to be noticed by other men. It's wonderful to think that another man would want me that way. Don't you like it when you see a woman looking at you or flirting with you?" I'm no different from the others. I like to be looked at with lust. And after all this time, I want a more. I'd like to experience going on a date, getting drunk on wine and having dinner, so to speak. And then another man takes you and lusts after you, just for one night. Not love, just lust, for one night. Then I would come home to you and be yours, to be a simple wife and mother for the rest of your life. You're anything but a simple wife and mother to me, Blondie, I objected. You are everything to me. I can't let you go to another man. I won't let you go to another man. You keep telling me that you love me. Why don't you show me how much you love me by giving me this? I know this is a big request, the biggest one, and it would be the greatest gift for me if you would let me do that, she said. No, it would be the greatest stupidity on my part to allow you to do this. If you really loved me, you wouldn't even ask, I said. Haven't I been a good wife to you and a good mother to our children? Shouldn't that give me the right to a free ride? You've had a lot more women than I had men before we got married. I'm just trying to even the score a little bit, she said. Actually, we never discussed numbers before we got married. All we really discussed was how we both believed in fidelity after the wedding. And for your information, I've only slept with 4 women in my life, including you. It's not exactly a big list, I said. Oh, I've always thought so. You have a lot more experience than I do, she said. You know a lot more than I do. I read a lot about this topic. I want to give you as much pleasure as possible. So it's still hard for you to say yes? What is it? She asked. Not only a categorical no, but also that I will meet with a lawyer first thing on Monday morning to start the divorce procedure, I said when shock showed on her face. But, she stammered. I understand how hard it must have been for you to ask for a pass, so that tells me that you're really serious about this. That tells me you're not going to let it go that easily, I said. That means you'll end up going behind my back to get your way. I don't believe you won't do it anymore, unless you already did, and it was just a smokescreen to get permission after the fact. No, I swear to you that I haven't slept with anyone until now. I said I wouldn't cheat on you, and that's what I meant, she whimpered. But you'd think that now that I know you want it, doing it now wouldn't be cheating, I said, looking right at her. Her inability to hold my gaze told me everything I needed to know. Do you want to destroy our family even though I haven't done anything yet? What is it? She asked hoarsely. If you finally have the courage to ask, then you've been planning this for a long time. And this tells me that you have already chosen a goal. He was probably involved in planning this too. Dinners? Dinners? You've already cheated on me, at least emotionally. By the way, who is he? I asked. I didn't choose anyone in particular, she said, staring at a point on the wall over my shoulder. The silence lasted about 15 seconds while I stared at a hole in her. She turned bright red when she looked at me and realized that I was looking at her with disbelief on my face. You don't have to know, Bob, she said softly. You're right. I don't need to know. But I want to know the name of the person who is destroying what I thought was a wonderful marriage. You can tell me, or I can call all your close friends, as well as your boss and all your colleagues, and ask them, I said. Her mouth dropped open in shock. Why you wouldn't? She began to say, I wouldn't? What do I have to lose? My life is in a ditch, and my marriage has fallen apart. What should I be confused about? What about my embarrassment? She screamed. I shrugged and tried my best to hide a smile. Name? I asked sharply. Dan. Dan Wilson, she said softly. Please, Bob, don't hurt him. I don't guarantee anything. I grabbed the remote and turned the game back on. She chuckled, wiped away her tears, got up from the couch and went upstairs to our bedroom. My eyes watched the rest of the Cubs game, but nothing registered in my brain. I can't even tell you what appeared on the screen after the game, but I know that I sat in front of the TV for at least 2 more hours. Although I think I did a pretty good job hiding most of my feelings from my wife, I was actually devastated. I had no idea that my wife was planning to sleep with another man. Looking back, I suppose I should have noticed signs of her dissatisfaction with me, or her life, or something else. Over the past 3 months, Tracy has become somewhat detached not only from me, but also from our children. In fact, my daughter Sherry was the first to notice this, asking me if Tracy and I had a fight. Then there were the phone calls that were received outside the room, which almost never happened until recently. in addition to the almost constant evening text messages. When I asked about it, she stated that it was Lisa who was having problems with her husband Jerry. It was more than interesting, because Jerry and Lisa lived just 3 houses away from us, and I had no idea that they had any problems. I spent the rest of the weekend thinking hard about my options. I told Tracy that I was going to file for divorce as soon as possible, but first I needed to explore every aspect of this, my marriage and my family. Of course, I could understand how another man could feel lust for my Tracy. She was a beauty when I met her, when we were both 21. And at 45, she was only 5 kilograms heavier, despite the fact that she had 2 children. I've always wondered how I got to know Tracy. She was clearly above my pay grade. It's not that I'm a troll or anything. I look decent. But guys who look like me don't often date the prom queen she was just 3 years ago, as a high school senior. In junior high, we both took the same astronomy course at Purdue University. I attended it just for fun, while Tracy needed this course to fulfill her scientific requirements. In that sense, I'm kind of a nerd, and Tracy realized pretty quickly that I'd be happy to help her pass the exam, since science is not her strong suit. It was nearing the end of the first semester, and we were studying in my dorm room, when Tracy leaned over and kissed me hard on the lips. I kissed her back just as hard. "Damn it, I thought you were gay for most of the semester," Tracy told me when we broke off the kiss. "No matter what outfit I wore, you never seemed interested." I was interested, but I wouldn't have thought it was mutual. "I was just trying my best not to drool in front of you," I said. We immediately became exceptional. I didn't have much experience, but I assumed she had even less, because she never complained and seemed quite happy with everything I tried in bed, thanks to my insatiable reading on the subject. With Tracy, it came in handy from the very beginning. When she opened her eyes 2 minutes later, all she could mumble was, "I love you, Bob." We got married 2 years after graduating from high school. 3 years later, our son appeared, followed by our daughter. Financially, we were doing pretty well, since I was an IT specialist and she worked in a bank when she returned to work, shortly after our youngest started school. Our son was preparing to enter Ohio State University for his first year in a couple of months, and our daughter was going to go to high school. In 2 short years, we were to become orphans. Over the past few months, we have been discussing plans for our future, including travel. I have loved this woman for almost 23 years. On the one hand, to refuse this because she asked for permission to cheat seemed excessively harsh, but on the other hand, I have already noted that the fact that she went so far as to ask for cheating was a serious problem. I wasn't born yesterday. I knew that if she had been so desperate to be allowed to cheat on her, she would have been desperate enough to act behind my back, especially since she had already told me about it and did not consider it cheating, although I did. Of course, there was also the question that she and Dan Wilson had already had an emotional affair, and they were planning this night of physical infidelity together. Will I ever be able to forgive this? On Monday morning, the first thing I did was call the divorce lawyer and set up a meeting on Thursday afternoon. Meanwhile, on the domestic front, Tracy tried her best to convince me not to file for divorce. "We didn't do anything, Bob. We're not going to do anything," Tracy cried. "Because you don't want a divorce, or because you know it's wrong?" I asked. She didn't look at me and didn't answer. "You're still hoping that I'll change my mind and let you, aren't you?" This caused her to look full of hope, which, unfortunately, predetermined our destinies. I sent Tracy to court a week after meeting with my lawyer. We lived in a prosperous state and earned about the same money, so it was easy with finances. There were almost no children at home, so housing issues were resolved along the way, and the parent, who was not a guardian, was responsible for the maintenance of the child for 1 year. We would sell the house and split the proceeds. Boom. It's done. 21 years old. It's over. Not so fast. Tracy hired a pretty smart lawyer who convinced the judge to schedule 4 sessions of psychological help, and if she deems it necessary, then more. The consultant, a woman in her mid-30s, was of the same opinion as my children and Tracy. Since my wife didn't actually commit adultery, why did I feel that divorce was my only option? I told the counselor the same thing I told Tracy and my kids, that I consider her asking me to make love outside of our marriage to be tantamount to breaking our vows. Because of this, I no longer trusted her as a marriage partner. I may still love her to some extent, but I couldn't stay married to a woman I couldn't trust. But I'll never try something like that again, Bob. I don't need anyone but you. Please, she begged over and over for the better part of 2 sessions. You'll never change your mind, will you, Mr. Rasmussen? I can see it in your eyes, the consultant said towards the end of the second session. I'm going to put an end to this farce and tell the judge to allow the divorce without hindrance. My personal opinion doesn't matter, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. I think you're making a huge mistake. Your wife did not cheat on you, at least physically. So, it looks like you would like to get marriage counseling to keep your marriage going for a long time. Your wife seems ready to make any concessions you want to keep your marriage going and your family. I know I winced and sighed. I love Tracy to death. I made this decision without flipping a coin. There's a difference between the way you and I look at things, Dr. Baker. You called it a concession. I don't think her promise of loyalty is a concession. I think it's called keeping the wedding vows that she made to me 21 years ago and that she planned to break with another man, I explained. My in-laws practically had a stroke when Tracy told them about the divorce. My mother-in-law called me the next day and shouted insults for a good 15 minutes, taking just one breath during the whole diatribe. She started screaming right after I said hello. My father-in-law, who has always been a more rational person, took her phone away from her while she was still screaming. She didn't even cheat on you, and you're divorcing her? After 21 years? Are you out of your mind, Bob? He yelled. I told him my version of events, and I could hear him making small, strangled noises as I told him. From time to time, he would say softly, "Really?" And then I continued. At the end of the conversation, he seemed much more depressed in spirit. Finally, he said, "I'm sorry, Bob," and quietly hung up. The following week, I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment next door. My daughter has decided to live in the house with my wife for the next year until she goes to college, but I thought the second room would be useful if one of the children wanted to stay for a while. They were both upset with me, although they seemed to understand why I was divorcing their mother. I had a friendly phone conversation with my neighbor Jerry a few days after I moved into my apartment. I informed him that his wife Lisa had a hand in my wife's plans with Dan Wilson and that Tracy claimed that he and Lisa had marital problems. I told him that I didn't think he was involved in the breakup of my marriage, but his wife was somehow involved, and considering how close they were with Tracy, was Lisa also looking for a young stallion? Oh shit, Jerry croaked over the phone. So you're saying that I might have problems too? Does your lawyer issue group rates? The phenomenon of social media has both positive and negative sides. For me, the positive thing was getting all kinds of information about a certain Dan Wilson, even without having to hire a private investigator. Saved me a lot of money. Wilson was Lisa's colleague and transferred to the local office from Cleveland about 6 months before my marriage broke up. He had a very pretty bride who was still looking for a job in our city, so he came home almost every weekend to see her. Obviously, he was trying to arrange something with my wife for the duration of his stay in the city. I was wondering if Tracy even knew about the guy's fiancée. Now everything is lost, except for the phone call I made to Wilson's fiancée. Shortly after that, I heard from some sources that Dan's wedding was canceled, and his fiancée said that he could spend full time with his old lady. Did I mention that his fiancée was the daughter of a very rich man? 2 weeks before the final divorce, 22 years of marriage to Tracy turned out. I had to admit that I was hurting inside because of what I had lost, but the longer I sat at Swanson TV before dinner, the more I realized that I was doing the right thing. I would have spent the rest of my life looking for evidence that she was cheating on me if I had stayed married. I knew with every fiber of my being that sooner or later she would find a way to cheat on me. She hated losing at anything and viewed the fact that she had not achieved her goal as a loss that needed to be corrected. I had a shot of single malt whiskey and was in bed by 10 p.m. Happy anniversary to me. My phone rang around 1 o'clock in the morning, and I noticed that it was my future ex-wife. I thought about switching it to voicemail, but since I was already awake, I answered the call. Oh, damn it, yes, she screamed. I've heard those sounds often enough to know she wasn't faking it. There was another indistinct squeal. I should have ended the conversation immediately, but I froze in place. I listened for 2 more minutes, long enough to hear Tracy's lover growl at his own release. Then I hung up the phone before they started cooing to each other. If I had the slightest doubt that I was doing the right thing, it would decide our fate. On the advice of my lawyer, I got into the habit of recording all conversations with my wife. While I was sitting there, feeling that my blood pressure was about to jump, I dialed my relative's number, and when my father-in-law confirmed his presence, I pressed play in the phone recording app. I let him listen for 3 whole minutes, then ended the call. I was almost certain that this little one-act play would not be repeated in the future. Unlike my wife, I did not use the charms of others until the divorce became official, and even then I did not drag a woman into bed for more than a year. I admit that I had difficulties in my social life. It's been 24 years since I last went on a date, and since I never planned to date again, I didn't keep up with dating events. Stupid me. It turned out to be a failed strategy, because the dating world certainly swept past me like a freight train at speed. I knew that part of my reluctance to date was in my head. I was afraid that I would be caught off guard again. I loved Tracy and never foresaw what would happen to me. There wasn't even a hint. The only thing that was easy to notice that had changed since the last time I met was the attitude of the women. When I was dating, everything was one-sided. The man chose a target. The man invited the specified target on a date. If the specified goal said yes, the man chose an occupation and paid for everything. These days, women seem to have been hunters almost half the time, or at least thought about how a date should go. Sometimes they even paid for everything. There were moments when I felt like a dinosaur trying to chase a cheetah. The date scene showed me that Tracy's sudden selfishness was not the behavior of a unicorn. Along with feeling more powerful, today's dating women are definitely more self-centered. Many of them wanted their own way, even to the detriment of their partners. If it was good for them, then it would be good for both partners and their loved ones. We were there, we did it. And all this is very recent. Okay, the first few times, women almost killed me. I was pretty sure I had pulled a muscle. However, as soon as I got used to physical intimacy, the level of pleasure went through the roof. However, it wasn't just the younger women. I dated women from about 25 to 55. I think you could call me an equal opportunity lover. However, I've always looked for women around my age first, so to speak, in my comfort zone. It's been a rough week, and after finishing a meeting with a new client on the other side of town, I walked into the bar of an upscale hotel, still wearing my suit. I sat on a high stool at the bar and ordered a single malt Glenmorangie. It was about 7 p.m. when I walked in, and about an hour later, a group of women from the bachelorette party were sitting at tables marked reserved. There must have been about 15 of them, and they were all quite noisy. I decided to stay a little longer and watch the fun, so I ordered a meal at the bar. The bride-to-be, of course, was the star of the show, and I noticed that she was a pretty girl of about 25, with light brown waist-length hair and big brown eyes. I admit that I'm a fan of long hair, so she kind of captured me, and I focused on her for a few minutes before I started paying attention to the other partygoers. That's when I noticed her. I assumed that she was about 40 years old, and from her age, I realized that she was a companion for the evening. The older mother hen, who was taken with her to look after the innocent and not-so-innocent younger chicks. The first thing I noticed was that she seemed a little nervous in her black mid-thigh length skirt, which seemed to be riding up a little higher on her legs as she sat on the chair. Several times during the first few minutes, she unsuccessfully tried to pull down her skirt. I smiled to myself. She really had beautiful legs. Her whole outfit was probably a bit youthful for her convenience, and I assumed it was made for her by one of the young women in the group. I mentally praised the person who chose it and convinced her to wear it. The women definitely seemed to be enjoying themselves, laughing, drinking, and eating, and when the three-piece combination started playing, several women stood up and started dancing with each other. The women dancing together seemed to cheer up the other men in the bar, who began to approach the women on the dance floor and those sitting at the table, with the exception of their chaperone. I waited for about 10 minutes, and when no one moved towards the escort, I decided that the way was clear and headed towards her. She had shoulder-length dark brown hair and bright green eyes that reminded me of Jacqueline Bisset in her heyday. Equally important, she wasn't wearing an engagement ring. She blushed a gorgeous pink when I asked her to dance. At first she hesitated, but then she agreed, and several young women sitting next to her expressed their grief to her when she stood up, pulled down her skirt, and took my hand. The first 2 dances were fast, and I had to silently thank my ex-wife for insisting that I learn to dance. The next dance was slow, and I was a little surprised when she pressed her curvy body against me. Her hair smelled like white lilies, and I chuckled to myself, because this perfume is not very popular among young women. We actually talked for a while as we glided around the dance floor. I found out that her name was Kathleen Franks. She was the aunt of the bride and the accompanying group. She thanked me for dancing and started to leave the dance floor after a slow dance, but I took her hand and invited her to join me at the bar. She started protesting that she needed to look after her girls, but I pointed out to her that she could perfectly see them from my place in the bar. We watched the young women and talked. I found out that she was actually 48 years old and divorced after 15 years of marriage. She told me that her husband, a man of means, had traded her for a trophy wife, who was 27 against his 48 when he married her 3 years ago. She also told me that her outfit was chosen for her by her niece, the bride, and that she felt it was a bit youthful for her, as she usually dressed more conservatively. I expressed the opinion that her outfit suited her perfectly, and I was completely out of my mind when I told her that I really liked her heels. Many years ago, I found out that women really seem to like it when their shoes are praised. Don't you think I look out of place in that outfit? She asked innocently. Not in the least. I'm sorry to say that, but you look good enough to be eaten. If I used to like pink blush, now I like the dark red ones that she showed off. We talked for about 15 minutes. She noticed that I wasn't wearing an engagement ring and wanted to know the story. She expressed surprise when I said that my ex-wife had never actually cheated on me physically. I'm really old-fashioned, I explained. She cheated on me emotionally and planned to do it physically. I couldn't trust her anymore. You don't tell someone that you love them, but you want to make love to someone else. I understand that, she replied. Everyone should have a line in the sand. She returned to the bridal table a few minutes later, but was more than receptive when I asked her to dance again about 30 minutes later. This time, when we were done, she took my hand and led me back to the table with the other women, which now had several more men at it. From my point of view, the evening was a success, despite the fact that the young women were a bit noisy. I was very surprised when Katie invited me to be her date at the wedding in 2 weeks. I was going to go alone, but I know it would be better for me to spend time with you. I know we just met, but you've already met a lot of girls who will be there too, she said. Besides, you'd be doing me a big favor, because I wouldn't be there alone and I wouldn't look really pathetic. I definitely wouldn't want you to look pathetic. I would be more than happy to accompany you to the wedding, I said. Tell me what color you're going to wear, and I'll choose the suit I have that goes best with it. She leaned over and gave me a quick peck on the lips. Oh la la, came the chorus from the other end of the table. I smiled brightly, while Katie blushed again. I could get used to it. I sat with Katie when we weren't dancing. At one of these moments, when we were sitting at the table, I kept my eyes on the girls at the bachelorette party, some of whom were clearly overdoing it with alcohol. I'm the father of a teenage girl, so it wasn't unusual for me to be in daddy mode with the young women around me. When I saw a young man take one of the girls by the hand and start leading her towards the toilets, I apologized, got up from the table and walked quickly and quietly towards them, reaching them just before the guy was about to push the girl into the men's room. The young man looked at me with disdain, obviously not afraid of an older guy in a shirt and tie. I admit that I will never scare anyone at first sight, but I would like to think that I am still in good physical shape, and I had a lot of troubles as a child. Sometimes you have to be prepared for some violence to do the right thing, which in this case meant protecting some young girl from becoming this guy's toy. I would hope that someone would step in and protect my little girl if the situation required it. Let go of my hand and get away from me, old man, he growled at me. She's old enough to play if she wants to. I let go of his hand, but with my other hand I grabbed his head and slammed it hard against the wall to the side of the door. I pushed him hard enough to break the drywall, bleeding his face and stunning him. Suddenly, he stopped seeming so self-confident and let the girl go. He also didn't seem to want these disagreements anymore. The club became quiet as people realized what had just happened. As soon as I started taking Alicia back to the bachelorette party, Katie and the rest of the group came up to us, grabbed the woman and led her back to the table. I was left standing face to face with the restaurant manager and another employee. I thought I was in trouble until the manager reached out to me and thanked me for helping the young woman. The police were called. This guy is going to jail. They will probably need your information and your version of the story, but I don't think you have anything to worry about. By the way, The drinks for the rest of the evening are on the house." "Thanks again," he said. "Wow, it was some crazy shit," said Wanda, the bride-to-be, when I returned to the table. "Thank you for your attention." "Not just Aunt Katie. How did you see that?" Katie asked me. "I was supposed to be an escort, and I had no idea what was going on. I feel pretty awkward about it." "It's not your fault. It's easy to lose sight of 14 girls in a bar if you're not a professional security guard or the father." Fathers, at least most of us, have what I call a father's vision. I chatted and had a snack with the women at the table until they decided to leave and spend the rest of the evening somewhere else. I kissed Katie gently on the lips as we said goodnight to each other, feeling pretty good and having her number on my phone. "Rent a room," one of the girls said to the raucous laughter of the group. I gently licked my lips and tasted Katie's lipstick as I watched the women leave the restaurant. I took my drink back to the place in the bar that I had previously occupied. "Looks like you did pretty well," the bartender chuckled as I sat back down. "Who would know?" I replied with a laugh. "A bachelorette party? Give me one for the track so I can celebrate my good fortune before I leave." My new best friend, the bartender Sean, earned himself a double shot of whiskey as a tip for the evening. Katie's wedding dress was light blue, so I put on my navy pinstriped suit, which I consider my costume, for myself in the room. I thought we made a beautiful couple, as did several of her relatives at the wedding. Several people came up to me at the wedding and thanked me for looking after Alicia. Obviously, the bride had spent the previous 2 weeks telling anyone who would listen that I was some kind of hero. "Heroic and beautiful, what a wonderful combination," said Katie's sister, Donna Fulham, the bride's mother, as she approached us to introduce herself to me before the wedding. "Thank you for helping the girls a couple of weeks ago, and for making my sister look like she has improved her taste in men." I also met Katie's 24-year-old daughter, Marissa, and her fiancé, Ben. "Well, at least one of my parents doesn't ask for dates in elementary school," Marissa said when she met me. "Dad will definitely hate you if you stay here long enough to be introduced." By the time the reception was over, I knew that Katie and I would cover the distance. A month later, I introduced her to my children. My son quickly became attached to her, and my daughter was a little reserved. She was still a little mad at me for divorcing her mother, even though Mom didn't even cheat on you. However, my son understood this. He had a serious girlfriend, and one evening we discussed fidelity in detail and what it means for each of us. My wife, Katie, and I retired a few years ago. We celebrated our anniversary with an Alaska cruise. With the help of daily intake of Cialis and Astroglide, we make love every morning before taking a shower and continuing our lives. All 3 of our children are married and doing well. In total, we have 6 grandchildren. I've only talked to my ex-wife maybe a couple dozen times since our divorce, counting our kids' weddings and Christmas holidays. She was married and divorced for the 2nd time. My children tell me that she blames me for her life being the way it is. "I've never actually cheated on him," she still tells them. "Some people just don't get it." End.